getting, okay, we're just getting additional $1 million for projects, that's actually directly related to climate change and for climate change adaptation or climate change mitigation. And this goes on. So the technical definition of climate finance has always been a very, very blurred, very blurred discussion. People would fight over commas, people would fight over periods and prepositions and stuff like that. It's almost as if that by design, people are intentionally confusing those on the front lines of climate change to allow them to engage the process even more effective. And as ICSC, we took on this challenge of how to simplify climate finance. And based on our years of working on climate finance, starting from the national to the international and regional work, we believe that climate finance, and I hope you'd agree on me on this, that climate finance is simply a plumbing job. It's the simplest way of putting things into perspectives. Like you have a source, you have developed countries providing development assistance. You have your own national budgets, which I believe are increasingly more conscious of climate finance spendings. And you have other sources. You have foundations, you have international NGOs, you even have academia playing part in providing, at some extent, climate finance for research and stuff like that. And you have the recipients. If you put things in this perspective, it's not oversimplifying it. It's simply trying to guide the whole process. Because then if you imagine climate finance as a plumbing job, you can approach it as you would approach any plumbing issue, right? You'll try to make sure that there are no leaks. You'll try to make sure that the faucet would actually work. You'll make sure that, when you put your pipelines, the water would go where it's intended and stuff like that. So what do we know so far? And I want you to keep, at the back of your mind, the concept that I introduced, that climate finance is simply a plumbing job, because it would be easier for the rest of my presentation. What we know so far is that, developed countries made a commitment of $100 billion to support developing country needs. We also know that, at least by the report in 2019, only almost 80 billion of the first 100 billion was actually mobilized through developed countries. We also know that national governments are identifying climate allocations within their budgets. Whether how effective they are, we don't know, right? We just know that people are trying to count existing budgets as related to climate change action. We also know that private sector and multilateral development banks are reporting high figures that they're supposed to be financing, providing more finance for climate action. In a report published, I think, around 2018 and 2019 by CARE Germany, it was said that people are expecting too much of the private sector. At some extent, people are hyping private sector as if it's a silver bullet to the whole problem. But in reality, MDBs and national banks are footing the bill to breach the 100 billion gap. So if there are any sessions that would work on the private sector part of things, it might be an interesting thing to ask, or at least to propose, right? I mean, how much is that private sector actually providing for climate finance? Since the private sector, and I'm just making this point, and I'll share it more of this in my subsequent slides. But it's just that in every climate fund, there would always be a private sector window, a very specific private sector window. How effective that is, that's still up in the air. How responsive the private sector actually is, we think a huge part of that is just smoke screen and over-reporting of their enthusiasm and their willingness to actually shift long-entrenched business models. We also know that non-government actors such as international development funds, international development NGOs, particularly in times of disaster, are also chipping in and counting their contribution as climate change related. But at the end of the day, you have to ask, are we really near in hitting our target? Or are we just double counting or counting the same things over and over again just to get a sense that we're actually advancing? I mean, I know that some of you have come from the most vulnerable countries. In the Philippines right now, I think we're on our 9th typhoon of the year, and we're expecting around 10 to 11 more within the year. I'm quite sure that you have at least a sense of how climate finance is actually working in your countries, or whether you can actually, or whether you actually contest that climate finance is actually present in your country. We also know, after that context, we know that high figures do not mean more money for climate action. We could just, as I've said, most of the reportings that are coming out, most of them are commitments. Commitments would have to be disbursed. Then disbursements have to be implemented before any action, before any effect can actually happen. And there's this tendency that we fixate on the commitments, right? And it's the same thing. I mean, so I've mentioned we led AFI Plus for quite a while, and we're still leading it. But one of the things that our frustration is that people just fixate too much on the commitment, even if they're waiting for the commitment to happen for like 7 years. Right? It's almost as if people are just holding on to the fact that, for example, US committed this much, they're going to give something, hopefully, then 10 years later, that thing didn't happen. Frontline communities, local governments play a crucial but often neglected role. As recipients of climate finance, local communities should be given a bigger role, a bigger space, so that they can actually provide feedback and take part in the evaluation, for example, of some of the climate finance projects. Because then, at the same time, the sources would have a insight that's very specific on the impacts, right? Whether the funds that they're providing for various projects and initiatives, whether it's actually making a dent, whether it's actually helpful and stuff like that. But right now, at least for the Philippines, and I think in most of the countries that we're working with, local governments and local communities are usually invited every now and then, just for the sake of having someone local on the panel, instead of providing a significant space that they can actually feel and influence. We should also looking beyond our list, and with list, I mean the conventional sources of climate finance. We do think that climate finance would have a huge role to play in debt management, especially in developing countries. I mean, we know how COVID really changed our lives for the past 2 years. But climate impacts continue to happen despite the pandemic, and the strain that these two factors put on governments in terms of debt. The debt to GDP ratio has been approaching a critical rate for the past year. And climate finance should have a bigger role in that, simply because climate finance can provide a leverage in managing risks, such as in climate and disaster risk finance, and in designing actual implementable projects in the Nationally Determined Contributions, NDC, or the National Adaptation Plan, or NAP. Climate finance, if ever you decide to work on it, you have to go beyond what's counted as climate finance and look at points of complementarity with existing development budgets. And with development budgets, the national budget is usually the best place to start. I know that it will depend country per country, even state per state, on how open the government could be in terms of showing the books on the annual budgets. But most of the impact, the most impactful opportunities in terms of influencing would be in that sphere. In the Philippines alone, the share of climate finance in the national budget dwarfed international climate finance reports by at least 5 times. And I think it's the same thing for most developing countries, because even if we say we don't have money, our national budgets would still be significantly higher than the commitments of most developed countries to developing countries. So why is climate finance accountability important? First, it's always good to know what we have. I know that some of you might have started working on climate finance and think that it should be reparations. Developed countries should be paying reparations to developing countries because developing countries have to bear the brunt of climate impacts, even if the whole thing started, or at least sped up, with decisions made by developed countries, right? And I don't argue that. It's just that it would be good to know what we currently have, our current state on climate finance, so that we would have better strategies in mobilizing more. For example, in one of the reports that we did, when we look at climate finance supposedly for adaptation here in the Philippines, 60% of that is just for disaster response. Meaning even if this money is supposedly for adaptation, for preparing us for future scenarios, a majority of that is just provided to us, right? It's just provided to us to respond to disasters instead of prepare and adapt for them. And if I have to put my bet, I think it'd be the same thing for most of the countries. Yeah, but it's not an easy work. It's not something, despite it being readily available, the data sets, it will take a lot of effort to actually get it online. It will take even more effort to filter it, make it into small pieces of understandable data sets. But it will pay off, because then at the end of the day, that we need more money for agriculture. We don't need more money for disaster response, right? Or we need more money for water resource management instead of industry, shifting our industries because they have more than enough because private sector is focusing on them. It's the same thing, there's no clear-cut ratio, but I think it has to be the same process of filtration of thinking if you want to work on climate finance. Accountability would allow to build a community of practice. You don't have to start from scratch. We've been doing it since 2013. Others are doing it way before we even thought of climate finance accountability. Others would continue doing it in the next few years, right? So this community of practice would be a good space, a good petri dish for people to actually exchange ideas, fine-tune their approaches. And every now and then we're quite surprised that, more data nerds are coming into the discussions and people are making the whole process of creating data sets easier. And if you're really interested in this kind of work, the community of practice would play a huge role, would be really beneficial for everyone. Climate finance accountability would help us see the bigger picture. I know that the Conference of Parties is fast approaching. I know that the World Bank is holding their annual spring meetings by next month. There are several important meetings, as I've said, in the East Resilience Global Partnership. We have V20 and G20 meetings and so on. So climate finance, if we're able to wrap our head around how to make it more accountable for our countries, we can actually empower our countries in these engagements so that they can say and check, every time someone says we're actually giving more than, for example, 30 million US dollars to your country. I mean, if someone is looking at accountability, our negotiators, our representatives can actually say, yes, you did report 30, but we're just getting 2 million for the past 5 years, right? Then the conversation will be more interesting instead of people, referring to different data sets that don't really make sense. Because then whether the climate finance reports are actually making sense, whether they're actually counting, whether they're actually effective. So what can we do to contribute in that? First is, just join the discussion through whatever means available, because most probably we have concepts of how an accountable process should run, how should it be structured, what platform should be present, but most probably our ideal concepts would not present itself. It's one of the harshest realizations that we realized when we started tracking climate finance, that just on the data availability, it's quite mind-boggling that, for example, 50 million US dollar project, we just have no local version we just have no local data on it. So you have to start from scratch and find wherever possible to sort of fill in these gaps, right? So just join the discussion. There are various modalities of that. I know there are formal and informal platforms, but just join and dive in. Because if you start joining these discussion spaces, you can also start fighting for it. Fight for more seats in terms of representation. And I'm not just talking about international funds. I'm also talking about, opportunities in the national and subnational levels. If your government allows budgeting processes that would require consultations, you have to fight for that space. And if you're able to win it, or at least make ground, you have to make sure that you're able to fill those space significantly, because it really sucks. I mean, it's frustrating even for me as part of the think tank and NGO world, that we did have some gains in some of these funds. Then you'll have people representing basically themselves and not really talking to communities, not engaging anyone, just attending meetings every now and then, flying into DC, going to Korea, attending COPs, but not really making not really make an effort to actually fill and maximize that space. And it's one of our frustrations as well. That's why, for example, in the Green Climate Fund, I mean, the Green Climate Fund have one of the most significant number of observers, if I'm not mistaken, across most international funds. And in the Green Climate Fund, even if we have a ton of NGOs working as observers, we still have to manage ourselves and make it more effective in our engagement and our approach, right? That's why we started working on the GCF Watch. The GCF Watch is basically a platform made by CSOs for CSOs. That's the way we pitch for it. But it's a way actually of organizing ourselves, organizing our thoughts, so that they would have more permanence, so that they would have a house, right? So if you go to GCF Watch, for example, after this session, you will see like CSO comments from previous board meetings about specific projects and so on. So for example, if you're from a country that has existing GCF Green Climate Fund engagements, maybe you can find some data, some information on what happened to the proposals in from your country. But even better, you can actually join the conversation there and provide information, provide feedback to the GCF Watch group, so that we can raise it during the next board meeting, right? And it's a slow burn process. You'll be surprised how much people ask for accountability, how much people ask for space, for engagement, how much people ask for stakeholder consultations, but then refuse to give anything back, right? It's just human nature. People would ask for space first, but then when they have it, it's a slow burn process, and it takes a lot of effort as well for the ball to start rolling. Same goes for the Climate Investment Fund. The Climate Investment Fund, I think, is one of the most organized in a way that it actually provides resources for observers to be present. And I think that's a comparative advantage when you compare CSO engagement, observer engagement, for example, from the GCF in the world, from the World Bank, from ADB and other MDBs, when you compare it to climate investment funds, because the seafood is actually providing resources for people to fly in, providing hotels and stuff like that. So it's quite different. But then at the end of the day, the requirement is still the same. People should find a way of how to organize themselves, because we have the space, right? We fought for it to some extent. Now it's time to fill those space and make sure that the way that the enthusiasm during the fight does not die down when the actual work comes in. On the practical sense of things, what can you do if you ever decide to join these spaces? First would be massive reading. Review proposals and policies. For example, in my experience in the CIF and in the GCF, we have tons and tons of documents. We have tons of proposals that we have to review and comment on. And we have the opportunity to deliver them on the floor, to be put in the official minutes of board meetings and trust fund meetings. But then we just don't have the mental space. We don't have the warm bodies to go through all of these documents. So a good start would be, lending a hand, saying, I can take care of this proposal because it's happening in my country, for example, in Zimbabwe or in Kenya, and I know some folks who might be affected by this project. Therefore, I can commit some of my time to review this proposal and provide feedback, just double check whether this proposal is actually going to be helpful and at least not harmful at some extent. You'd be surprised to see that a lot of the proposals, especially the big ticket ones, would have zero consultations with indigenous peoples, would have a very artificial sense of local stakeholder engagement, and so on. Gender integration usually is not there, sustainability, and so on. Those things are easy to spot if only people would actually read the proposals, if people would actually read the policies. But right now, the space, despite being available, as I've said, we just don't have enough people to go through everything in time for board meetings and trust fund meetings. I think collectively, we should maximize our comparative advantage by growing roots. And growing roots would also mean elevating local voices, right? I mean, the beauty of groups such as this is that all of you came from different countries, all of you came from different backgrounds and so on. People who are attending climate finance discussions on formal spaces would basically most probably are living in airplanes and airports. The connection is just not there because people function on a different level. and it's not by design. It's just, you know, human nature. And it's the same thing for us. I mean, I'm working on the GCF. I'm working on this on the SIF. My organization is also trying to get a proposal approved for 5 municipalities here in the Philippines in the GCF for the GCF. But I still, you know, it has to be a conscious effort to check every now and then, you know, whether this is actually making sense from the point of view of local communities and local governments. And it's the same thing, you know, if you can start building your, as I've said, your communities of practice from the ground, on the ground, and if you're given the opportunity to elevate these voices, for example, the GCF Watch is a good platform for that, because we're actually looking for stories, feedback from you know the implementation level of the GCF projects. Then we would, you know, we would elevate and we would try to make those voices louder and heard as much as we can. And I think that the most important point that I can make is, you know, you have to make a commitment to learn continuously. Climate finance is a technical thing, you know. It will not fly. You will not have a good time if you come unprepared and try to engage, you know, these funds, or even your government or even your local government. It's not easy, but it's workable. And as I've said before, you don't have to start from scratch because you have existing initiatives that maybe, you know, it's not 100% thing direct fit to what you're looking for, but usually these initiatives will already provide enough context, enough background in terms of approaches on how you want to approach climate finance in general, you know. And yeah, I just forgot, you know, this, for example, I mean, for us who are working on climate finance, we usually attend meetings in suits. We usually are expected to behave and follow a decorum, right? But to some extent, we make decisions that would force us to campaign to return to our original activist roots. Because sometimes, you know, the radical changes is just not there inside, you know, if you box yourselves in the four walls of a meeting room, right? So for example, I mean, in the SIF, people are more agreeable, things are more open. But for example, in the GCF, people actually do protest decisions every now and then. And the success of those, because it's not an everyday thing that we do during board meetings. So every time we do it, it would have more impact, right? So for example, civil society organizations were successful in stopping the accreditation in the GCF of banks that are refusing to diversify their portfolio from coal-fired power plants and fossil fuels. I don't think that would have been possible if people didn't leave the boardroom to protest, you know, to get media attention, to put pressure on the board and so on. Yeah, so you just have to know, you just have to find a way to know whether, I mean, when you would just stand up and start protesting for something that you strongly believe in, right? It's the same thing for most of the like climate negotiation spheres, but I think for climate finance, people are usually quite surprised when people actually do protest during board meetings and trust fund meetings, because as I've said, we usually arrive in suits. We usually behave on a decorum that's prescribed by the board, or the committee that's handling the fund, right? Because we fought for these spaces, and we're trying to, you know, to engage it as in the best way we can, even if that means we follow rules, we follow decorum, and so on. So yeah, I mean, it's as I've said, it's been a pleasure to be invited in this engagement. I was quite surprised that you call it Climate Finance Academy. Kudos to that. It's quite good that we have a lot of people. I know that I only scratch sort of the surface of everything. If you want to learn more, I mean, it's everywhere, but in our website is icsc.ngo. So we do have some reports on climate finance there. But I think also, I mean, a good thing to follow right now would be the V20, the Vulnerable 20 website. They have some really interesting work on decarbonization and how climate finance can play a role in that. They have really good work on assisting the most vulnerable countries to plan and engage international climate financing and so on. So I mean, climate finance, it's almost a myth at some extent. People say, no, it's climate finance this and climate finance that. But it's it's the first thing you should do is to demystify it and make sense of it on your own context so that it would make more sense, right? It's a technical thing, but it's not impossible to learn and traverse. Just be prepared for the huge amount of frustration that you'll get. But then I believe me when I say the small successes that you get, everything would be worth it. All of the frustrations of the sleepless nights and so on. If you have any questions, I'll stick around and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Angelo, for your kind contribution and your presentation. We take this time to revise back what we've learned. Angelo has figured out that it does not mean more money for climate action, because this is dependent on the commitment from countries and institutions that have said that they'll support us. So it's not dependent on the monies that they pledge. Then number two, we also have debt management for climate finance. We should know how to manage our debts so that we remain accountable within our communities for us to be able to mobilize more resources better for a better future. And also, he has advised us to look at the national determined contribution, the NDCs in our countries, and the national adaptation plan for our sessions, also in our countries, that we should revise them and see where the resources are going so that we focus and get to know where really climate finance opportunities exist. Then he also mentioned that we should also get access to the national budget and really understand it so that we know as much as more resources are generated in the national budgets of our countries, we should know where the climate finance opportunities are, where as a community participant, we should really be continuous and consistently following up with the government at the national level. Then he has also encouraged us that participating in these sessions, these forums, the trainings, the virtual meetings, the both formal and informal sessions are really important. And from this, we have learned that he has a lot of opportunities for those persons who want to assist him in doing and reviewing proposals for GCF, which I also feel I'll share my interest too. So we now welcome the questions that are in the chat. I will be able to watch at or also revise those questions. You can answer them from there, but also if you have a question, you can raise your hand. We can give you 5 minutes. Raise your hand, and I hope you'll be unmuted and we hear your question. So question and answers to Mr. Angelo, please. 5 minutes.
Yeah, we do already have some questions in the chat, so probably we could start with those. Kairos, you can probably also access the chat. There are at least 5 questions to you at this point.
Sorry, I wasn't able to look at the chat while I was presenting. Yeah, anyway, on the first question that I saw, I mean, financing modalities for developing countries in terms of decentralized systems, I think the focus should be not on the centralization, but more so on ensuring direct access, right? And that direct access can happen in various levels. For example, in the Philippines, we decided to have a national adaptation fund of our own. We call it the People's Survival Fund. My work on climate finance actually started writing that bill, being part of the team that wrote that bill and eventually passing that into law in 2012. And the focus is, direct access, enhanced direct access, just making sure, I mean, wherever you decide to put it, just in case you're in the position to lobby your government to explore that and try to make something like a national adaptation fund. As long as you follow an enhanced direct access modality or a direct access modality, things would be okay. Direct access would only mean you reverse the process instead of a top-down entity telling everyone what to do. For example, province 1, you have to do water management. Province 2, you have to do agriculture. Enhanced direct access simply means you ask them what they actually need. So you would provide a space for local governments and at some extent local communities to tell the fund managers what they actually need and how much they would need to implement to satisfy that need, right? So that's in a few sentences, that's how direct access or enhanced direct access would work. On the national level, whether you aim for a separate climate finance budget allocation or whether you lobby to include climate finance component in existing budget lines, personally for me, it doesn't matter as long as you have a way of accounting for the allocations, right? So it would be a case-to-case basis. I mean, for the Philippines, we started accounting for climate finance under the World Bank project, the Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review Program years ago, and people just counted everything because people have this idea that they are doing a better job if they're able to count more, if they're able to tag more. So now people ended up tagging everything as climate finance, and it's not as effective as we would have wanted that. So for me, as long as the accountability measures are identified, choosing how to approach the integration of climate finance in national budget, it's really a free discussion. I saw a practical question, how one can join to be an observer. What does it take? It actually, it varies from funds. It varies from your age of where you want to engage. I know that for the CIF and for the GCF, you have to be an official member of an organization that's registered in the GCF and in the CIF. The GCF has a self-selection process of active observers, which is I'm part of. Active observers simply means we represent the rest of the observers inside the boardroom because not everyone is allowed, to enter the physical boardroom. So we represent them. We speak on their behalf. We don't speak our minds. We speak the agreed statements, the agreed questions of the observers. That's for the GCF. For the CIF, there's an election process, and I think the CIF is quite innovative on this. They have a third party that manages nominations and so on to ensure that they have a good spread in terms of geographical location of observers. In terms of communities and LGUs access to the GCF, it has to start from an agreement with an entity that can actually get money from the GCF, and that would mean access entities. It has to start from that, right? That's a technical part of climate finance that I was referring to. At some extent, you have to follow rules and processes. And for the GCF, you have to work with an access entity. And it does not have to be a full-on proposal right away. For the GCF, you just have to submit a concept note. If that concept note gets a nod, or if it gets approval in terms of principles, then you can get more funds to actually develop it into a full proposal.
Kyle,
Yeah.
sorry, I have to stop you.
Yeah, no
I
worries.
guess we're running out of time, but if you could reply to some of the questions in the chat while we take the second speaker, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I can do that.
Thank
Okay.
you. Over to you, Apollo.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Angelo, for covering up the questions. As you continue covering the questions, we welcome the next speaker, and our next speaker is Charlotte Grab, and we want to thank Angelo first for the opportunity that he has taken and the research that he has taken to give us such a good presentation today. Thank you very much, Mr. Angelo, and we welcome you to participate in our next meetings as well. For now, we'll take a break, and that break will get some music. I have a music on the background, which is a Kiswahili music, though Catholic Christian. So you can listen to it as you take break and prepare for the second speaker, who is our Charlotte Grab. So 5 minutes to you, team. So a slow music on the background.
Yes, the final one will be people in the area of Ethiopia. So there will be more people, more network, and also a chance to get more funding for the project as well. Yeah. So without further ado, I would also thank you for Alika to become the moderator and also to give the lecture and also to guide us to share the story to everyone in here and also to uh, Agil and Jeffrey, who's also become a part of this organizing for the second session. And you will see more from 2022. So
Charlotte, if you are ready, please.
Okay, great. Cool. So I'm Charlotte. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, but we still can also hear the music.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry, I thought it sounded quiet. Cool. Well, yeah, my name is Charlotte Greb. Thanks, Apollo. That was a fun interlude music. I'm here to speak on kind of some of my activism experience, as well as how I got involved with the campaign to free my friend Jessica Resnicek from prison. And it's 4 a.m. where I am in the US, so apologies if I'm like a little slower than usual. And feel free to put stuff in the chat. So yeah, so I guess kind of my entry point into this work, about 10 years ago, after my master's in ecological economics, I had been doing different international development work. I had actually lived in Kenya for a few years, so it's nice to see some Kenyan people on the panel and in this space. I was working in Washington, D.C. for a few years. I was working at a marine conservation NGO called Oceana, and they do all policy change, and actually helped set up the Philippines office, which is also cool to see Philippine speaker, Kairos. And yeah, I was doing this work for a few years, and I became sort of disenchanted with a lot of the just kind of being narrowed to doing only policy change. And I actually read Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. And I feel like all the lights went off for me of how capitalism and climate change are really connected in a really, in a very real way. And so for me, I was craving, to do more direct action and move outside of like the lobbying advocacy space. And so this was in 2016, and I know this is a really international crowd, but the Standing Rock protests were starting at that point, or they were going on. They were really growing at that point. And so, for those of you who are less familiar, Standing Rock became this kind of flashpoint in fossil fuel resistance, and it was against the Dakota Access Pipeline. So the Dakota Access Pipeline is a 1,200-mile pipeline that runs, through the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. That's where it got the name Standing Rock from. So it goes from North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and then Illinois. And so for me personally, I started out, I took like a 28-hour train there, and, being part of this Indigenous-led, non-hierarchical camp of thousands of people was really, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I found it really electrifying in a lot of ways. And so I was there, and then things were getting really militarized. And so eventually I made my way down to Iowa, where I heard that there was this kind of smaller movement starting, but they needed extra hands. And so I went down there, and that's where I met my friend Jessica Resnicek. And yeah, I wasn't there at the beginning, but her story is really incredible. There was no resistance movement to this pipeline in Iowa. It was all happening at Standing Rock, which is an Indigenous reservation. And so it was, at Standing Rock, it sort of grew because basically the pipeline was supposed to be routed through Mandan, which was a very like white town. And then when they realized the risks associated with this pipeline, they rerouted it through the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. So it was just this, blatant environmental racism that was happening. And I think it just really kind of struck a chord with people. It was just so clear that this was racist. And it was also, built upon years of violation of treaty rights. And so it just kind of became this moment, and it grew into tens of thousands of people coming out there to support the resistance of this pipeline being built. And it was going through burial sites there. And so that was, you know, incredibly disrespectful to the communities there. And I think people really just kind of understood in plain terms what this was about. So anyway, so I met Jess in Iowa, and she had started the Iowa Resistance. It's cool to hear, you know, in her words and people closer to her at this time, that she basically was trying to block this work site, and it was literally just her. And she was arrested, I think, 3 times. And you know, my friend Alex on the campaign can talk about this because he heard her on the radio, and there was just this call out of like, I'm here, come help me, you know, like I'm alone, come support. And she did, you know, she was kind of like this one woman army that really started this whole movement in Iowa. And so she said, I don't want to keep getting arrested. Where can I stand where I won't get arrested? And they were like, that ditch, because it was a public spot. And so so began kind of the Occupy the Ditch moment. And so people started to come, and they were occupying the ditch, and people were camped out and trying to block this work site of where the construction of the pipeline was happening. So this grew, and then that's where I met her. There was this direct action caravan that we were part of together. And I got involved in a lot of different things as my, you know, I just showed up wanting something different than policy change. I felt, yeah, just like my hands were tied. I didn't have any skills. I showed up, you know, like I love cooking, I'll chop onions, and, you know, learned a lot of skills from people and escalated things, and ended up locking myself to a horizontal drill that was going under the Des Moines River in Iowa, which is a source of drinking water for 40 million people. And I was charged with a felony and had to serve a month in jail and had to pay close to $10,000 in restitution. And so this issue of Jess, which I guess I haven't even gotten to, she's in prison for 8 years and was labeled a domestic terrorist for her actions. So, you know, I had a tiny taste, just to give you a little, you know, personal story of where I'm coming from, and why this issue is near and dear to my heart. And so, yeah, so that was kind of all happening in the fall of 2016. And then in the summer of 2017, Jess and another woman came out and publicly admitted to, so I'm seeing the chat. I'll answer all that later. Yeah, they came out and admitted to, you know, damaging sections of the pipeline. They had disabled different pipeline construction equipment. And so they came out and admitted this the summer after. And then 3 months later, the FBI raided their house. And in 2019, a federal grand jury indicted Jess on multiple charges, and she was placed on house arrest. And then in June of 2021, there was a sentencing hearing, and she pled guilty to conspiracy to damage an energy facility. And in the sentencing hearing, she received an 8-year prison sentence, which nobody was expecting. She was labeled a domestic terrorist enhancement that increased her sentencing guideline 5-fold. And I'm going to get really into that soon. And she was ordered to pay over $3 million to Energy Transfer Partners, which is the pipeline company, and some other things. And on August 11th of last year, Jess started her sentence. So she's now been locked up for just over a year, like a year and a month. And me and the others on the support team are trying to get her out, and also spreading the word about the importance of her case. Like, this is about Jessica. Obviously, we care about her, and, you know, I'm an abolitionist. I don't want anyone locked up. But this is so much bigger than Jess. And that's why we're really terrified. You know, we're seeing emerging of the fossil fuel industry and the government in this case, and it's setting a really terrifying precedent. And so that's kind of what we're here and we're trying to do, is spread the word about this case. So yeah, I guess I'm going to show a video in a moment just to give you a sense. But, you know, for me, you know, because I was asked to speak about my personal experience too here, you know, I just really related to Jess and her story, and I would really encourage you all to listen to interviews in her own words. You know, she talks about how she tried everything, you know, and she ran with the Lakota youth to DC during the permitting process with the Army Corps of Engineers. She submitted comments as part of environmental impact statements. You know, she did engage in, you know, nonviolent, you know, civil disobedience. She held signs. She did a hunger strike out front of the Iowa Utility Board, which is where some of the like the permitting happens. You know, she tried everything, and this pipeline is still being built in front of her eyes. And her interviews are so beautiful. You know, she speaks so eloquently of just how heartbreaking it was, you know, and these home waters that are so sacred to her. And she speaks about, you know, growing up and, you know, feeling like the world was chaotic. And then she would go to these rivers and plug her nose and go underwater. And it was just like these really powerful moments of solace for her. And she just couldn't bear, you know, just watching, you know, over 40 river crossings and them just putting this pipeline under this river, under that river, you know, fracking, you know, drilling mud, spilled places. I forget, it's like tens of thousands of gallons of this drilling mud that's really toxic. So yeah, I mean, I just really related to that feeling of powerlessness, you know, like it's hard to just submit your comments and hope all goes well. And then if it doesn't, just kind of like, oh, well, I tried, you know. So she speaks a lot about that. And, you know, this was a pipeline that a federal judge came to rule as illegally operated, like the permitting process was illegal. And she, you know, in her interviews, it's really amazing. She has been a Catholic worker for over 10 years. And there's like this really kind of just poignant piece of her actions where it's so clear she's acting out of integrity and faith. And this was not a rash decision at all. Like, you know, through her interviews, you can see that like contemplation is a really big part of Jess's actions. And she has a long history of like nuclear disarmament work. She was involved in Occupy 10 years ago. And this was really considered, you know, like she really weighed the consequences and was very clear-eyed about what these actions would mean for her by disabling sections of the pipeline. And she acted anyway, you know, out of integrity and out of faith and out of, I think, responsibility to protect these waters that are really dear to her. So now that I've given you a little taste, I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, I can't share my screen. Can I share my screen or no? I was just gonna show a little video.
Yeah, just a second, Karishma.
Okay.
Karishma, can you share the co-host rights? I cannot do it from my side, unfortunately.
That's okay. I mean, if I can't, that's fine, but just thought it'd be more interesting.
1 second. Yeah, you're co-host now.
Cool. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll play this video. I don't know why that's not working.
You should share your sound as well.
Oh.
And we are,
Okay. Maybe
bottom
that works.
line is, we want this pipeline stopped. People who need to exercise peaceful means of doing it, and what are our options? And let's look at this critically and say, what really stops pipeline?
On election night in 2016, Jessica Resnicek and another woman disabled pipeline construction, and then later used a welder to cut small holes in sections of the PNC pipe, which would eventually be added to the 1,100-mile-long tube that carries crude oil from North Dakota to Atlanta and passes through her home state of Ohio.
After delaying the flow of oil for months, Jessica and her partner took responsibility for their actions in a public press conference.
In her statement, Jessica wrote that after exhausting all avenues of process, from petitions for environmental impact statements and public comment periods, to hunger strikes, marches, boycotts, and civil disobedience, she took her actions as a last resort.
For Jessica, who grew up in a small town and spent her childhood swimming in local rivers, preventing the pipeline from contaminating the lake was personal.
As a very young child, I would go to the river for peace, for solace, for healing. I remember at that time you could swim in the water. I remember just like, even as a young child, just plunging underneath that water and like kind of like bugging my nose. And all you could hear and feel and see was life around me.
Biden's Department of Justice has declared Jessica a domestic terrorist, sentenced her to 8 years in prison and millions of dollars in fines paid to the pipeline company.
The case is important, and it's because it's not unique.
Laws specifically criminalizing environmental programs have been passed or put on plate.
The moment anyone seriously challenges a corporation's freedom to push us closer to a cliff,
The government uses the language of terrorism and they make it effective.
that's why Jessica's legal team, with help from supporting groups, is appealing to terrorism to pressure the courts to reverse this dangerous precedent.
For the push groups and 30,000 people who signed petitions for it.
What they're doing to Jess, they could do to any of us. We can't let that happen.
So I have stopped recording, showing my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see you now. Thanks.
Okay, cool. I will drop the link in the chat. It's a pinned video on our group's Twitter. Let me check. So yeah, and I'll share some links at the end too. Cool. So I hope that helped kind of contextualize Jess's case a bit for you all. So yeah, so Jess was labeled a terrorist. She's in prison for 8 years. She's ordered to pay $3.2 million in restitution. Like, what does this mean? Was this random? Was this just kind of bad luck? And the answer is no. We know exactly where this came from. This was politically motivated. This is from the oil and gas industry, and this is a direct result of the protests at Standing Rock. So in 2017, 84 Congress members, 80 Republicans, and 4 Democrats wrote a letter to then Attorney General Jeff Sessions asking specifically that people who tamper with fossil fuel infrastructure be labeled as domestic terrorists. And so this is all, you know, documented. There's no mystery here. And so the way that terrorism enhancements work, you know, a prosecutor doesn't bring that to a courtroom and choose. It can only be in federal cases, and the Justice Department has to like request it pretty much. And so then the Justice Department, you know, suggested this for Jess, and it happened. And, you know, as a result of Standing Rock and the rest of the No DAPL movement, there is a series of critical infrastructure bills that are in this same vein. So they've been enacted in 15 states in the US, and they're pending in several states. And the details vary, but basically you can now get felony charges for what used to be simple misdemeanors, such as trespassing, impeding the operation of pipelines. And the legality of this is being challenged in a lot of ways. So people who are on a public road can now, with this very like broad sweeping laws, be charged with the felony, because that's like impeding fossil fuel infrastructure. So this, you know, over hundreds of people in with the Line 3 pipeline, which is a pipeline built last year, sadly, in Minnesota, have been charged under these critical infrastructure bills. People at the Bayou Bridge pipeline in Louisiana were charged under this. There's multiple court cases going on challenging the legality of these critical infrastructure bills. And so this is much bigger than Jess, and that's what we're worried about. And, you know, these 84 Congress members that asked for Jess to be labeled a domestic terrorist, they received $36 million from the fossil fuel industry throughout their careers. So it's clear exactly why this is happening. You know, the fossil fuel industry is scared, and they're trying to protect their assets, and they're funding the politicians in order to do so. And specifically, oh, let me just see. Link is closed. Okay, I'm gonna get to the chat after. So specifically with the domestic terrorist label, we are really worried too for the precedent this sets. So the domestic terrorist definition legally hinges on whether you retaliate, intimidate, or coerce the government. And so we argued in the appeal, Jess was targeting a corporation, not a government. And the prosecutor said in the appeal process, the gold star of this was that Jess critiqued the regulatory process of this permitting. And so basically, therefore, that could be interpreted as intimidating the government. And that is a terrifying precedent that sets. So that's basically, you know, threatening our First Amendment right.
شمال فعلا معلش سوري اصلا كنت طبقته
Where is it coming
بالعكس
from?
I don't know.
ما هي علشان
Okay, give me a second to
Hello?
look at first
Hey.
the sound.
دي هيعمل ايه
Okay.
All right.
I think we're good. So yeah, so basically the precedent that this sets is that if you critique the regulatory process, then that could be legally interpreted as being a terrorist. And then, you know, that has, you know, it increases your sentencing fivefold. It has very real consequences to be labeled that. So that's terrifying precedent number one. And then number two, as part of the appeal process, we tried to get into this labeling kind of legality, and basically there's no accountability in this process at all. And so they basically said it was irrelevant that she was labeled a domestic terrorist. It was a harmless error, which is used in a lot of cases. And like, we're not going to go into it. So, you know, we're seeing like the pieces that we're really scared of is like, now, if you critique the government, you can be labeled a terrorist. And also, this was a permitting process, by the way, that a federal judge later ruled was illegal. So just like the logic of that is bonkers. And then number two, that you could be labeled a terrorist with no accountability for, you know, if there's merits to that at all. So now Jess, you know, is locked up in cinder block walls, you know, from trying to protect the waters for this pipeline that, you know, it leaked 5 times within the first 6 months of its operation. I only have 5 more minutes. How did that happen? So, this isn't just Jess, and that's what we're really scared about. This is happening in so many other cases with Line 3, Bayou Bridge, the campaign with Steve Donziger. If you all don't know about that case, I would definitely recommend getting involved. He's a lawyer, and they successfully won this court case against Chevron in Ecuador. And then basically he, was put on house arrest and all this stuff, and just through all these basically like legal loopholes. And it's really like the lesson from his story is if you challenge the fossil fuel corporations, like they will suppress your dissent. Even for somebody like Steve Donziger, who's a lawyer, and has access to, legal arguments and all this stuff. And we're also worried, the backdrop of this obviously is like, IPCC has said this is code red for humanity moment in climate change. And, people are kind of, I think, feeling frustrated with the kind of traditional avenues of like, submit your comments and hope for the best. So that's kind of the context that this is taking place in. And this is part of an international trend too. Amnesty International, Global Witness do really great work on this. They have these interactive maps on their sites, and so many countries right now, like Russia, Sri Lanka, France, Senegal, Nicaragua, there's like this expanding array of measures to suppress organized dissent, whether that's, unlawful mass gathering, misuse of force, internet shutdown, surveillance. Like this is not just, and that's why we're worried. This is part of this global trend to suppress protests, especially climate protesters. And it's happening there. Duterte in the Philippines is really cracked down on protests, Bolsonaro in Brazil, but it's not just far right leaders. Like, there's a new bill in the UK, this anti-protest legislation looming. There's also some in Australia. So this is part of this much bigger trend, and that's what we're really worried about. And I also wanted to mention, since this is this space is oriented around climate finance, so from the Standing Rock protests, from the No DAPL resistance movements, there's so much that came out of this moment in history. Like there is all this really incredible movement building and awareness about fossil fuel infrastructure and resistance. And then we have the suppression of protests that came out of that. We have, the letter to label people as terrorists. We have the critical infrastructure bills. Those were direct results from the No DAPL movement. And then we also have the divestment movement, which is really sparked in the US there. And they're all interconnected. And the financing of these projects, there was so much direct action and resistance that now, DAPL became a completely financially insoluble project. And, it was estimated that Energy Transfer Partners, the pipeline company that owns the pipeline, they collectively had to pay over $7 billion collectively from protest costs. Financiers pulled out. It's estimated it costed about $22 million alone to suppress the protests at DAPL. And this wasn't just isolated. So last year with Line 3, Enbridge, the company that owns that pipeline, they had paid all this stuff just came out a few weeks ago. They paid over $8 million to basically buy out different public authorities to suppress protesters and do their bidding to protect their assets. So, like direct action and resistance will lead to like an increase in the private security for these pipeline companies. And then there can be a case that these aren't really good investments anymore, so then investors pull out. So like there's a really big finance piece to a lot of this. And I would encourage you all, if you're interested in this, the group Stop the Money Pipeline does a lot of really good work on the divestment aspect of things, and that can look like a lot of things, that can be aligning the business with the Paris Agreement, removing chairs from the board that have ties to the fossil fuel industry. It can be removing deforestation from your supply chain. So yeah, that's kind of, I just wanted to touch on that finance piece and how they're all connected. And then I'll wrap up, and so I have time for questions. So yeah, I would love for you all to get involved. We recently, our appeal was denied, and so we're now going to be launching like a presidential pardon campaign, and we're really going to need the support of everyone. Like, we see this really as a global issue, and we're trying to connect to other global orgs who are facing similar challenges and trying to fight for the same things. So yeah, I encourage you all to get involved. I'll drop a bunch of links and, sign our petition. That's going to be really big for the clemency piece. Buy one of these cool t-shirts. They're really awesome. Really cool designed by Kat Eng. There's a cool story behind them too, with the myth. And, follow us on social media. We're at Free Jess Rez. That's REZ. But I'll drop it in here, and yeah, get involved, message us, take your own actions. And let's see, what am I missing? Yeah, I'll drop my Twitter in there too. You can message me if you want to connect with me personally. Yeah, and thank you all. We feel strongly like what happens to Jess could happen to any of us. And, we need to stand together and support each other when the state takes someone. And, protecting the water is never terrorism. And I'm just going to drop some links, and then I can.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your intervention. It seems that we have lost our moderator because there is a power blackout in his community. So that's very unfortunate. I'll try to take over the moderation while he gets back. So this was very inspiring, yet very terrifying, Charlotte, to hear. So I would ask you all, just to encourage Charlotte, maybe you can put a word that would you think comes into mind when you think about activism, and also after hearing the story of Charlotte, what do you think, one word that would describe the whole thing that also touches you? That would be great to see in the chat how you people would react on these cases and those incidences. So we do have some people highlighting some comments, for example, in Germany, coal plants. And also, I did not see much question for you, Charlotte. And Anastasia asked you, what is the current situation in Europe in order to suppress the fossil fuels investment? I don't know if you can answer this one, or there is another one from Irene. Can we really do effective activism without going into prison? Yes.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, this is my 4 a.m. brain. What is currently the situation in Europe in order to suppress fossil fuels investments? So I think that's asking about what's the divestment situation in Europe. I don't know. I don't work actively on divestment. I'm sort of adjacent to that world, but yeah, Stop the Money Pipeline does a lot of good work. I know that it's happening. I just don't know, unfortunately, the details of what it is in Europe. I know a lot more about the US situation. Can you really do effective activism without going to prison? I freaking hope so. Yeah, I think it's tricky though. I think these laws, the language of them, it's really broad, where you can legally be, on a public road next to a pipeline and get charged with a felony. It's really terrifying. And I think we need to get creative, and I think we need to make sure we protect each other, because these laws have become so broad, not just in the US, but in a lot of countries. But I think, I think that sort of like edges on this important question of like, are the stakes, I could see someone interpreting that question being like, well, it's too scary, let's just not do it. But Jess talks a lot about this, like at what point do the stakes become so high that you act outside of what is allowed? I would argue we're definitely at that point in the climate crisis. And, I think the state and the fossil fuel industry wants us to be scared, and they want us to disappear into the shadows and not do anything. And that's really the worst thing we can do. And the best thing we can do is like to support one another and band together. And I think, because they're scared, we are strong when we're together. And I think the critical infrastructures, the letters, all of this is also proof that they're scared, because they know how powerful we are when we're all together.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks a lot for your dedication and for staying up until early morning for us. That was very hard. And we hope that we will all follow you on Twitter, and also keep updated with your activism, and also be motivated from that. So I guess, did you share your Twitter link already? No?
I did, but I can drop
Yes.
it again. And yeah, I would just encourage people to follow the Free Just Res links and, sign our petition. We're at 16,000 people now, I think. So yeah, there's the links again.
Thank you, Charlotte. So you all have seen that we might be doing some advocacy on Yongo side. We do it mostly through statements and by trying to influence the decision and policymakers. But you can see that activists like Charlotte are totally on the ground, and it's totally terrifying, because some of us also think that it's not something that we could be doing, like jeopardizing our future or jeopardizing our engagements that we already have. So it really takes a lot to do what you're doing, Charlotte. I hope that we can give you your support, and also we can all pledge to have a better future for all of us. Thanks a lot, Charlotte. I think you're most welcome to stay, but we don't want to deprive you of your sleep, at least for the next 20 minutes that is left for this academy. So yeah, you're also welcome to leave. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll bow out.
Yeah. So yes, so we are going to move on to the next part of this session. So as you know, we had a game on Financial Times. So we would have taken you to breakout rooms to play this game about net zero, but it's also freely available to anyone. So instead of doing this, we are going to move on to the evaluation assessment, because we have received a lot of comments from you all, and we would like to address them today and see how it goes on. So I'm now going to share, we are going to share the updated list, because some people mentioned that they are not in the group. So please go through it, and please reach out to us if you cannot see your name in there. Yeah, so you can reach out to us. Please check the document. We will give you like 2 minutes to check and to let us know if you do not find your name. Still, yeah. In any case, please feel free to put your questions other than not finding your name regarding the evaluation assessment, because I'll be leaving the floor to Mariam, who is leading the evaluation committee for this one. Yeah, over to you, Mariam.
Hello, thank you, Karishma, and thank you for the speakers for these amazing presentations. So as we have mentioned in the first email, to get a certificate for participation at this capacity building session or academy, you will have to have attended 3 out of 4 3 out of 4 sessions and complete the presentation along with your group members, which you will now see in this document. And please send us or tell us, notify us if anything is missing. I will share my screen now. Okay, so how are we going to proceed? This is okay. So again, you will have to attend 3 out of 4 sessions, and please do not forget to fill out the attendance form so that we can note down your participation. And then at the end of the academy, on the 1st of October, you shall submit a 10-minute recording along with your group, a group presentation to on this email here, which you can see here, hopefully, on one of the countries that we you have been assigned to. Okay. So why are we doing this? Because we know that learning is best is the best learning process is through implementation. So we want you to apply what all of that what you've learned throughout the sessions to a developing country. You will choose a project idea for the country you've been assigned to. First, analyze what the country has in terms of socially, politically, financially, what is the state of the country. And then you will, according to that, choose a project idea, a pitch, and lay out a budget and finance a finance plan. And then you will decide on the project should be dedicated to mitigation, adaptation, and or repairing loss and damage. So again, how you will be proceeding. First, you will analyze the developing country environmentally, seeing what reserves they have, fossil reserves or renewable energy availability. And then, of course, all of the data about energy consumption, CO2 emissions, potential climate change impacts in terms of loss and damage. What is the current loss and damage? What is potential loss and damage like? Then economically speaking, what is the GDP of the country, per capita or not, and what is its development course like, then the employment and unemployment rate. These are just examples, but definitely you could go beyond that. Inflation is also an important parameter. And then looking at the social aspect, population size, poverty, equality, because all of these boundary conditions will determine, or they could help you or give you ideas for what the project should then look like. So also looking at existing projects in those countries could help or inspire you, create a similar project or even build on one of them. And from that, you create a SWOT analysis. For those of you who don't know what that is, you analyze what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of a given topic, but in this case, it's a country, are. And yeah, and then moving on to the project pitch again, project idea, and why you think it could be successful. Then this is then the most important part, how you want to fund the project. So all of what we're discussing here in the academy should be demonstrated through this section, that you have understood that. What are the required sources in terms of technology, human capital or capacity, and then you budget the whole thing and try to estimate the costs. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but it has to go in the right direction. So which funding mechanisms fit your process or project best, and then funding sources, which developed country could be the donator for the funding, and then moving on to youth engagement. How could youth contribute to that project? The role of them, and then you have to analyze the impact of your project on the 5 Ps, which are people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership in that given country. So, and then you could also include the international impact on other countries from that project if it's a large-scale project. And then at the very end, you should look at review mechanisms like data, how to improve the project, the efficiency, and project implementation to assess its success. Yeah. So, any questions so far?
When is this due?
Yeah, it's due to the 1st of October. Has that been a question in the chat? I can't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's due the 1st of October. Maybe I should also again here. Yeah. All information is linked here.
Let's see, there is Summer over here. You raised your hand, Summer.
Yes, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I haven't attended last session, and my name is not in the list. So how can I fix that?
Okay,
sure,
so
we'll assign you to a group.
We are taking note of everyone's whose name has not been in the list or name has been removed and so on. So we are taking good note of that, and you would be appraised of that within 1 hour after this session today. But help us to help you, because if you're not reactive, I mean the others, and if you're going to come afterwards, then it's very hard to reassign the group. So please check the chat now, and then we have already taken note. There's not much to address now, around five of you, so we should be able to do that.
Okay, and I wanted to ask about the recordings of last session. I have sent an email last week, but I haven't received any link for
all the recordings have been shared with all the participants. You should check maybe the spam email, because it's sent from the working group email, which is not a Gmail, so it's maybe went to the spam. So every one of you, please check your spam mail, because it's not sent from our personal Gmail, so it might go there as well.
Okay, so last question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you as well if there is a WhatsApp chat group for all of us in which we can communicate better.
There is a WhatsApp group with your team members for now.
Your respective team members, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So someone asked, how soon can we get our members' contacts? So Cherub, sorry if I mispronounce your name. We thought that it's kind of like data protection. We don't know what kind of data that your members would want to have or not. So we left it open for a WhatsApp group. So yeah, your members should be joining the WhatsApp group as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All links to the WhatsApp groups have been shared per email. If you haven't received the email, we will send it out again with the document where the chat links to the WhatsApp groups are listed. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Krishma.
Worries. And we are also taking note. You don't have to repeat yourself so many times, Jacqueline and Mohammed. We have taken notes of your name, and we will check it on our site on why you have not received this email as well.
If I can jump in for a second.
Yeah.
If it is still unclear how the presentation should or the analysis of the country should look like, we also have an example case but I don't want to extend too much on time. So Karishma, if we have more time, then I can quickly go through the example analysis sample case. If not, then
I think most of them are trying to sort out their groups for now. Let's take some of the questions over there, because we are still on the groups and we can provide more support over there.
Okay.
So Vinayak, the presentation is due for the 1st of October. Yes, and we are trying to see. I can't see the updated list. It has been shared in the chat. You need to scroll up. Sorry, I can't be sharing this so many times. And no, you would be assigned the same country that you have been assigned previously, Ola. So yes, you can rest assured over that. When do we start working in groups? Since no communication from the members, you're supposed to start working as soon as we created the group. But yeah, no communications from members. I guess please wait until like midweek. You can reach out to us if you do not hear from any of your team members in the group. Is it a video recording submission? Yes. Maybe you're seeing the chat, Mariam?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
I can also jump in, but I thought you were answering. Samar, you raised your hand?
No,
yes. Yeah. I raised my hand again.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask, is it okay to start a group for our own that studies the case of our country, Egypt, because it's not one of the chosen countries to form a group for?
Because it's the sample country, which I could present at the very end, or maybe next session, to give you an idea.
Okay, I see now.
So,
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And where have we stopped, Krishma? Money doesn't appear. When is it due? We have to answer that. I can see the updated. Okay, when do we start working? We have also answered that. Those assigned to Saudi Arabia, please join the group. Okay, does anyone else have any other questions than those here? Limitations on the tools that we can use? No limitations.
As long as we can access it to review. Yeah.
I mean, you are also going to submit a video recording, so as long as we can open it, then everything should be fine. Yes.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it going to be like a group kind of pitch where all of us will maybe participate in making that group presentation, or it has to be individual?
No, all of you have to present together. Ideally, distribute the time on each participant so that we could also make sure you've all worked equally, which is not necessarily an indicator, but at least yeah, well, if you have 10 minutes and you're 5 participants, 2 minutes per person, or yeah, you can also, we can sort it out when you have a specific question on that. If one part is longer than the other, then it's also not a problem if it's the time distribution is not the same. But yeah, it would be ideal if everyone presents.
Yeah, sure, makes sense. Thank you very much.
And some of the cues you can use Panopto, where you can do group recording. So it would be like a session like this, and every time someone would be talking. So you can use Panopto to record. This is a tool, or you can simply do a Zoom recording where you're presenting and your team members are in the gallery like this. That would also work. That's just an idea without like, you know, you have to deal a lot with the logistics of it. Yes, Summer presentation has been shared already, will be shared again by end of this session.
Leslie, if your group members are not responding or have not joined the group, please contact us and then we will assign you to another group or assign other members to your group. If one group, if the number of participants are not distributed evenly. Then the other question, what is the assignment or question. Okay. Yeah, I can go through I will also present the sample study after we answer the questions, but then and then it will hopefully be more clear.
Yeah.
Danish.
I guess, yes.
Here in the sex recording, yes, Panopto for recording. You could also record with the Zoom.
Hello, ma'am. Can we make a complete group for the entire, set of participants? Because any sort of information which can be shared, it can be disseminated through that group quite easily if you think that, it's feasible to make a group.
Karishma, can you answer that? I mean, we usually communicate through email, but
But since most of them are having trouble with the email, maybe we can create a WhatsApp group as well. So let me create one. We can share it immediately with you in the chat. That would be great. And then everyone who is here can get. So if you can bear with us, we'll create a group for you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
And while Karishma creates the group, I will again go through the sample case.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, for regarding the question of what is the question or what should we be doing, you should be analyzing the country you're assigned to in terms of environmental, economical, and social aspects, and look at existing projects. And then from that, create a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And at the very end, do a pitch project, come up with a pitch project idea for this specific country in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and or loss and damage. You will have to analyze the funding mechanisms, youth engagement impact on the 5 Ps and review mechanisms. And again, these slides have been shared before, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. To give you an example of a case or sample study of Egypt, we will, for the environmental analysis, it is good to look at the reserves of fossil fuels to see how much potential or how much energy does your country still have in terms of fossil energy, and maybe also minerals. Hydropower is also an option, which I have not included here because it's not really like it is actually a renewable source of energy, but then you can't map it, or you can't analyze reserves of hydropower. So I just excluded it, but feel free to include it because it's an important source of energy for some countries. RNP ratio is reserves to production ratio, and that is where you see, okay, it is an indicator of how long these fossil fuels would suffice for that specific country. So here as an example, in oil, for oil or gas is a better option. Egypt has 2.1 trillion cubic meters of gas, and the RP ratio is 36. So this is an approximation of like 30. If they continue producing the same amount of gas they are using now, it would last for 36 years, this amount. So yeah, and then of course looking at the solar atlas, wind atlas, biomass, geothermal is also very useful to see how much theoretical potential this country has. But of course this is different than the practical or technically feasible amount that could be used in terms of solar or wind, because you can't build a wind power thing, I don't know, above houses. So you have to still have have free space for that, and then of course you have to look at what is economical and not what is not. Then Also energy consumption, CO2 emissions. These are, we've also shared the useful sources where you can get the data from at the very end. Climate change impact. So maybe you're looking at potential loss and damage and occurring loss and damage. So agriculture would go with decrease, coastal floods would increase, biodiversity would decrease, water and food security. You could gladly also include numbers for that or statistics. Then economical analysis. This data here is from on the right is from the World Bank, and on the left is from Statista. Statista is also a good source, but you sometimes need accreditation for it to be able to access it. So yeah, population density, existing projects. Yep. And then, one second. All useful links are here. Okay. We will also share these sources with you per email, and then if you want, we could also share them on WhatsApp. But yeah, our world in data is very good, very useful. Irina, the statistical review of world energy is really a treasure of data. So World Bank, Statista, as I said, IPCC report, if you want to look at potential loss and damage. And then the FAO. And of course, looking at ResearchGate, Climate Action Tracker, all of that. Any questions?
Thanks, Mariam. I think they are asking for the presentation. Yeah, we would share the presentation with you. So I guess that was very helpful. And if ever you come across other kind of data sources and you wish to share with the whole team, you can, with the whole group of participants, you can share it in the WhatsApp group now, you have access. And also, we have created a WhatsApp group as you have requested. Please try to join it. We will also share it by email so that you can join. We've seen that there is around 30 participants so far, so that's good. At least 30% of you are already there, and we can assist you. We know that we are reaching the end of this, and we remain at your disposal for any kind of support that you may have. But also, we also apologize for being a bit behind with the queries that you are having, because most of the members also have professional engagements or educational academic engagements that they have, and we were also very busy in Africa Climate Week last week. So we request for your understanding, and we are trying to, it's the first academy that we are having. We know that it's not perfect, but we are trying to do all that we can in our capacity to help you all. Then Henry, and then you have to understand, sometimes you ask me questions twice. Henry, I did tell you that I have noted your name for the first session. We are not opening the attendance form for last week. If you did not fill it in, we will fill it in for you, but we are not reopening it. So yeah. We also request you to be attentive when we are sharing some information, because sometimes the same questions are coming up again, and then it overcrowds the other ones. So thank you very much for being a good audience and for showing interest in climate finance. This is just the first step that we are doing to help you. And once the collaborators that we have over there see that there is interest and there is this momentum being built, I'm sure that all those troubles that you're seeing can be reduced and mitigated, you know, and we could bring up something that is clearly good and very well. For example, just one example, that we are hiring someone to do a research, because we know that we are all volunteers and we can't collect the data. So like, yeah, we can get someone to help us full time with planning the academy and so on in a more professional way. We can have a dedicated platform. I mean, sky is the limit to plan an academy. So you are the first group, so you're the ones going through all the glitches that we are having, but we really thank you for your patience in this. And also feel free to reach out to us on WhatsApp if you need more support. Thank you. Then we would be having you next Saturday and also on the 24th for the 2 other sessions. We have reached the end of this session for today.